Hello and welcome to Workplace Conversations. I'm Edward Obi, Director of HR Hub Plus, and your host in these chats about the ins and outs of the modern workplace. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Brewster. Sarah manages Fresh Seed, a people and culture consultancy for the creative sector. Sarah has also worked in the sector for over 20 years and is passionate about creating a sustainable future for the industry, building on what the sector creates and developing its cultural strength. With a background in organization psychology, design, and development, Sarah and the Fresh Sheet team have helped multiple organizations thrive through their expertise and guidance, and it is Sarah's aim to help the sector thrive and grow for future generations. Sarah, welcome to the broadcast.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, good to be here.
No problem at all. So now it's time for some questions from our listeners and friends because that's what they're all waiting for. So let's dive right in. Um, let's start with a conversational one. Uh, Pete's impression is that culture is just a tick box exercise in organizations and not the real deal. What is your response to that, bearing in mind that is his own opinion, but a question nonetheless?
When I looked through these questions, I was really interested to see the different view about culture. I think it's a really interesting discussion, isn't it? And it's quite common, I think, Pete's view of it. Um, Unfortunately, I think a lot of organisations do see culture as a tick box exercise, and a little bit like they do with ED&I and sort of mental health and well-being. It's sort of like if we've just ticked the box, we've proved we've done it. And I think that's part of kind of the old world of work moving into this sort of new world of work where we've done a lot of research, haven't we? We know that what the workplace, how it operates well, where it thrives, what it needs to be a powerful force that gets the best out of people. And yet there are organisations that perhaps haven't looked to that information, or perhaps sticking to their own learnt behaviours and patterns that are familiar to them. And they may keep an individual safe, but do they keep an organisation safe? And the truth is probably not. So if they look at their data and evidence, they can probably see that there's sort of peaks and troughs in that data that says things like sickness absence might be quite high, or there might be quite a high staff retention issue. So, you know, I think it's a shame that organisations are still in this tick box place, but I have to say I think a lot of organisations are, and I'd like to see some good PR for culture, and there is some good stuff going on. There are some great organisations doing some great stuff, but I think needs to be more validity about why that matters. Well, that's what I'd like to see. So yeah, Pete, great question. Thank you.
Okay, that's very, very, interesting considering, the old culture order transitioning to the new culture order, which leads me to the next question, Beth's question, actually. And she's asking, why is company culture important?
Now this is one of my favourite questions, I have to say. Thanks, Beth. One of the reasons I love this question is because we see culture, or lots of organisations do, as Pete said, as a tick box. But it isn't, is it? People are people. They're not processes, they're not policies, they're individuals with needs and desires and goals and ambitions of their own, and also a world beyond work that sometimes impacts work. So why is company culture important? Well, because we're all humans coming to work to do a job, and of course we can't individually tailor our culture around each person. but we can have a good stab at what pretty much works across the bar. And being compassionate, for example, is really powerful with individuals, and compassion is misconstrued as a weak or a fluffy component. But in fact, compassion in the compassionate leadership is intention. It's what does our intention mean, and how can we get the best out of people and each other by being more intentional in our actions. So it's actually more powerful. So why is company culture important? Well, it's the way that you make each person within the company thrive, and it's about how you get the best out of individuals and your organisation. We're currently in incredibly challenging times, probably the most challenging that we've faced in a century, and yet we're saying that company culture is a commodity. I don't think it is. I think it's the thing that makes you stand out. It makes your brand powerful. It's the thing that shows to people that even in the most challenging of times, we're together and we care. And I think that's very powerful. And as I say, I think perhaps misconstrued as fluffy when it's really far from that. Yeah. So good question.
So yeah, so we've seen how company culture is very, very important. You know, people may have perceptions of what it's all about. I see situations whereby, individuals set up organizations with good intentions, and, things may be due to their level of expertise or understanding of how things work don't actually go according to plan. So, Mark's question is, where does a company's core value come from? We've set up this organization. So, what do we do next? How does it fall into place?
So we've got a phrase in our company called the School of Misinformation, and we say you only ask for what you know, and you don't seek to find more. And this this is sort of the thing that happens in a culture where a culture doesn't thrive, where you're not seeking to learn and grow, so that growth mindset doesn't exist. And you're not asking questions, so it's quite childish behaviour. You're not able to ask and reach out to your networks and find information to help you grow. And what's really important, and why values sort of come in, is they sort of allow you to have a boundary. They sort of allow you to have a sort of this is our boundary, this is our markings of how we're going to work. So it might be that we're going to be human. Now, human can be all kinds of things, and all humans are human after all. But the intention behind being human is that we're going to be a good person and do well. And that's the boundary by which we can then allow an organisation to thrive. And I think the essentially a core value came from what was the old mission statement world, and sort of has been condensed down into a more more tangible, easier construct. And values allow you to also the internal values tie into your external values that go out to your audience and your customer. But it's your identity, isn't it? It's the bit that gives you, as an organisation, clients or employees, that identity, that brand that says, well, that's where I want to work, or that's where I want to shop, or work, or who I, as a customer, procure services, or whatever it might be. But certainly from an individual basis, and an employee basis, it's about where, in knowing what that organisation is about and what they stand for. And in today's world, the ones that are standing out are the ones that are more ethical, interestingly. And a lot of data that we're seeing is a lot of candidates today are looking for more ethical values in their search. And so, core values identify that for you. They make it easier for you to see, don't they? But also, it's that from an internal point of view, from a cultural point of view, it's about how you, as line managers, leaders, and individuals, operate around those values. Therefore, not to be whatever those values might be. It might be being professional. right, well, I'll always be professional in my interactions, both internally and externally. So they're a boundary, aren't they? They're, and from a psychological point of view, that that's what a value is. It's our kind of our internal principles of who we are, and what defines us, and that sort of relates into the company. So yeah, good question. These are great questions, all of them. I like them. Thank you. Thank you,
Oh,
everybody who asked them.
thank you so much. We obviously didn't want to make it. We obviously didn't want to make it easy for you, but we had to go into the nitty gritty. Research it out. Um,
I love
but
it. I love
yeah,
It's
what?
interesting.
Thank you, thank you. Now we're in an environment whereby we see cultures every day, irrespective of the sector. We put on the news, we hear different sort of things, and then various organizations, and I'm sure that you would have seen quite a lot as well. Now, Elizabeth's question is, how do you turn around an established company culture? Now, there may be organizations that have deep rooted cultures that they just don't want to move out from it. They've adapted to it, it's a norm to them, but then, you have to change and adapt to the times. So, in relation to that question, how can you turn around an established company's culture that may be not so positive?
Oh, there's all kinds of factors in this, aren't there? I mean, part of it is your, leadership buy-in. Part of it is investing in the time that it takes to do it. And if you're turning around an established company culture, particularly where there's resistance to it, you have to expect that it's going to take longer than you hope. And then it will always take longer still, because it always does, because even any change management program never goes to plan. I can tell you how many I've worked on in my working life, and we always plan for the unpredictable, and that's so true, and never more so than when COVID came along, and we all suddenly went, well, look, there's test case in point that you can't predict the future. But how do you turn it around? Well, leadership buy-in is the most important part of it, and obviously planning, really good, intense planning, asking external support if you can't get the internal support. Sometimes in change management, particularly, what we see is it's actually very powerful to have the external support, because internally we get used to the voices, we get stuck in an echo chamber, and we get used to all those sort of internal behaviors, and we don't listen to the challenging voice. We don't listen to the expertise, I suppose. We sort of get used to that kind of, well, that's just what they always say, we won't hear it. So having an external party sometimes helps you identify that kind of the need and the importance of something. Established cultures where there's real great resistance, I would want to look at the data of why there's resistance, what's causing that resistance. Sometimes it's individual behaviours, sometimes it's because you haven't recognised that there's work coming up in that team, or that area of the business that you haven't actually properly researched and understood. Turning around an established culture can be difficult, but it can also be really empowering and really, really, really positive if it's handled well. And one of the pieces we say a lot about any change management piece, whether it's a merger or whether it's sort of even changing the tea bags, which, heavens above, we do that, is making sure you communicate. A really, really misunderstood part of an undervalued part of any change is communication, and consistent communication, and communication well beyond the point of the change happening. So sort of that constant discussion, and I think that's how you do it. That's whether you can do it well. Well, all change is never easy, and there's only a small percentage of people who adapt well to change. And there's only so much predicting you can do, but your first starting point, I think, is why do you need to change it, and what's your data telling you? You know, occasionally we've had clients say, well, we want to do, I don't know, we want to do a massive restructure. And when we sort of drill down with them and say, well, why do you want to do that restructure? Actually, what they say is, we've got 2 or 3 underperformers. Well, that's not a restructure. That's looking at your performance management structures and looking at your line management capability. And yes, in itself, that's change. And yes, in itself, that's a cultural issue. But sometimes that's also because people don't feel safe and they're not thriving as themselves, for whatever reason that might be. So yeah, communication and listening and understanding. So looking at what your data says, what your evidence says, and having a fresh pair of eyes on that evidence and data to make sure that you're really being guided by the right reasons, not by sort of your gut or your instinct, really. Which, you know, gut and instinct is all great, but not all. It isn't always right. There's a big controversial piece, but it isn't always right, and it doesn't always serve you in a situation when you're trying to make a change. Um, Sometimes established company cultures can be really bad. Sometimes they can be really, really good. Sometimes it's individual teams within those cultures that you need to look at, or individuals. Sometimes individuals aren't thriving, and we need to put some support mechanisms in to help them, or it's time to have a slightly different conversation around kind of, well, what you know, why are you not thriving, you know, what you know, what can we do as an organization to support you? So yeah, lots in that question, Elizabeth, a massive question. I could probably do a podcast just on that. So I won't, because I'm sure we'll be here till 6 o'clock tonight, and Ed needs to go somewhere. But yeah, it's one of my favourites. You can tell I just went, oh, on that one. It's one of my favourites. It's where I cut my cloth, definitely, is turning around an established culture. Yeah.
Yeah, good. So, you've spoken about data, you've spoken about feedback, and, various conversations to drill down the main reasons why. Now, James' question is, what is the value of employee feedback, and how can that be linked to company culture?
So feedback mechanisms are, I think they're quite a new mechanism in the workplace in the way that we know them now. So it used to be that we had that sort of old appraisal system that happened every 6 months and was onerous for everybody involved, and nobody really did anything with it, and it would just gather dust for another 6 months. And if you were lucky and you were in a big organisation, there might be someone tracking those and maybe putting some L&D and training in place. But most often in a small organisation, that just became onerous task and nobody really liked to do it. Um, where we've moved to is this sort of more one-to-one feedback mechanisms. So whether that's sort of through the surveys or whether that's through discussions, you know, we've moved to seeing the power of that. And why do we see the power of that? Because we now know what's happening on a micro level in an employee's life, as well as a sort of a larger scale problem or not problem, or, you know, whether they're doing well or not. And so it creates that culture of employee safety. So the psychological contract is embedded there. It's allowing people to say, I'm struggling, or I'm loving this, can I do more of it? And being heard and recognised. And how does that link to company culture? Well, if you're heard, you do more. It's as simple as that. If when you're going for a run, you've got someone cheering you along the line. If you're in a half marathon and you've got someone cheering you as you're running along, you know, a volunteer handing out the water and cheering you doing a great job, you do more. You feel more lifted. You feel you run faster. Just for those few minutes, you might run a bit further, faster. So why does it matter in an employment situation? It's the same thing. If you've got someone cheerleading you and hearing you and understanding you, you thrive. If you've got someone who's got your back, who might recognise, oh, you know, Ed was having a really bad day today. His dog has just tripped over his daughter as they were leaving the house, and now he's in A&E, and he was supposed to be in a massive disciplinary this afternoon, and that's not going to happen. You know, as an individual, your line manager's now got your back. Your line manager's saying, "It's all right, Edward, I've got this. We'll sort that out." You feel more invested in that person, and then that organisation. You feel heard, you feel safe, you feel valued, you feel cared for. So why is employee feedback important? God, well, in the days before we could talk to people about how we were doing, I think probably back to that data and evidence, we were probably seeing a higher attrition rate, higher sickness absence rates, higher levels of disciplinaries and grievances, certainly less happy staff. I think one of the reasons that mental health has been so high until is because we weren't creating these thriving cultures, and I think that is one of the things that we need to continue to tackle. And one of those is looking at feedback mechanisms. So again, it's not fluffy. It's not weak. It's a strong mechanism that allows us to know and identify problems and be proactive in resolving them. And I think that's probably the best way anyone can be, right?
Hmm. Totally agree with you on that. Totally. Totally. Now, drum roll, because this is an important question, considering it concerns the creative sector that you're so passionate about. So, a listener who wishes to remain anonymous, we'll just call him Han for the sake of this question, stated that culture is non existent in the creative sector. What are your thoughts on this and how can it be addressed?
Well, in part, I agree. I think it depends on whereabouts in the creative sector you are. Um, and there's a broad brushstroke to that. And therefore, sort of one part of it where you've got games and that element of it, I think culture is really well served and considered. In other parts of it, really less so. And I think this caller is absolutely spot on. I think we're there to address it. I think is a simple answer. Is that's what compelled me to start the business, and because I recognise we're not invited into the room. We're not engaged with as a function. HR is just not included. Because of my background and my knowledge and skills, I know that I'm far broader than just the HR element of it. I'm obviously there's psychology and the sort of OD, so the organisation design and development part of it. So I can see what needs to be done to change it. But it's not going to happen overnight. There are an awful lot of amazing people doing an awful lot of work towards making a difference. So that's sort of on the bigger picture, broader brush component part. From the smaller, sort of more individualized point of view, I think it's time to say, I don't want to work for this. I'm going to make a stand. This isn't where I want to be. There are people and companies and organizations doing that. So it depends on really where you were in that journey, as to what access know is available. If this person wanted to contact me via LinkedIn and have in a normal, a discreet conversation, that's totally fine, and I can signpost you towards support and mechanisms to help you with a pleasure. Every HR person is bound by a set of professional conduct standards. We're not allowed to disclose information, are we, Edward? So, if this individual wanted to speak to me in confidence, that's absolutely fine, and I would happily do so. But yes, the creative sector has a lot of work to do, and some of it is around growing up and accepting that there's no longer any good to say let's keep HR out of the room. We need to be in those rooms. We're there to create safety, and we're not there to put people on the naughty step. We're not there to create, tell anybody off. We're not there to create barriers. We're not there to do any bad stuff. We're there to do really good stuff. I think that HR is also widely misunderstood in the sector as well. So I think it is misinterpreted in that way. But there's an awful lot that can be done towards it, and there is an awful lot being done. So it will take time, but there is an awful lot happening. So I think hold tight. As a wider sector, if anyone's, owns companies that are not who want to do it well but don't know how, then engage with it, with the how, whatever that how is to you. Engage with it. Don't be shy at coming forward. If budget is an issue, which is often an issue within the sector, budget is a huge issue, particularly in arts, but also in TV and film, then there are organisations that provide all manner of brilliant things that are budget flexible. So there are great well-being offerings that do the same. We are the same as an organisation. We have flexibility around our budgets in order to ensure that you access the support. Again, this is a podcast all in its own, and I could go on for ages here on this question. But to this person who has sent in this question, I thoroughly hear you, and I am sorry that you are asking a question that indicates to me that you are in an industry that's not thriving. But if we can help in any way, we will. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. And Han, if you watch this later on, you've heard what Sarah said, and you'll be in contact if you decide to choose so. So Lily wants the following questions answered. We hear about organizations, cultures, and values. What does a healthy, high-performing culture look like?
So I'm going to challenge the high-performing part of this question. So high-performing is like something we say about a sports person, but an organisation isn't a sports person. An organisation is made up of all different individual skill sets, abilities, experiences, and knowledge. And individuals are full of their own experiences. So high performance is, why do you want a high performing organisation? What you actually want is a healthy, thriving organisation. And by creating that, you create the high performing without even realizing it. Because what high performing really means is engaged, shared goals, shared values, shared purpose. That's what you want. And you want people to get the best out of them at all times, or more or less, because you can't be happy all of the time, but you can at least try. You can at least know that there are support mechanisms to help you if you're not happy. So what you want is a healthy organisation. And what does a healthy organisation look like? It looks like people are actively listening and able and safe to be heard. It means that people can raise concerns and not get them dismissed. It means people have well-being mechanisms around them. Diversity thrives. It isn't just that tick box. It's inclusive. It's equitable. It's there. It lives and breathes. It means that it doesn't matter who you are. You're important. You're an important component of the machine that makes whatever that thing that the business does. High performing, once you've got all of those things in place, that just happens. It just happens. It isn't an achievement. It isn't a tick box. It isn't a thing that we aim towards. What we aim towards is healthy and thriving and safe. And if we've got that, you've got everything else. So does that answer that question? Can you see I could just got on a soapbox about this one? I could just go on forever on culture.
Exactly. And I love the last three words: healthy, thriving, and safe. Which leads me to this next Sherlock Holmes question. Matthew asks, how do you investigate culture in the workplace?
Now this is where I go to town. Well, oh, sorry. This is where the geek in me goes, yay, data, evidence. Oh my God, surveys, one-to-ones, everything. Let's do it. Just go for it. Let's ask questions. Let's drill into your data. Let's look at what your evidence is telling you. What does your sickness absence look like? What does your Monday holidays, you're calling it your emergency leaves, look like? What do your inter team issues look like? What does your disciplinaries and grievance looks like? What do your attrition rates look like? What are people asking for? What are people moaning about at the water cooler moments? Whatever they might look like in today's hybrid world, what are those people asking for and demanding? That's how you start. Your next thing is survey, 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 survey. Ask questions and don't be afraid of the answers. If the answers come back as a negative, don't avoid them. That is probably your biggest gift, because what can you do with a negative? You can turn it up. I know that's a cliche, but we say in everything we talk about is, what do we do with information we lifted up? We turn a negative from being negative into positive feedback, because once we've got the view of it, the wider view of it, we know what we've got to make better. And from an HR point of view, there's all kinds of, we've got a massive toolkit. We could just apply all kinds of ideas and concepts to help you. One size definitely doesn't fit all. And I can tell you, every client conversation I have is different, which sometimes is slightly difficult to keep up with. Sometimes is great fun because we get to be creative. What next do you do? One-to-ones, discussions, focus groups, find out. And what do you do with that information? You put it into something, you've got ideas, and then you can start creating. You can test, you can pilot them, you can ask for, you can have more people in workshops saying, well, we heard you, this is what you said, what do you think of this idea? And they'll say yes, or they'll say not on your Nelly, thanks very much. And there you've got something to keep working on. And the more that you give people feedback, the more mechanisms they have to feed back to you, the more that you get a better view of what you want in your workplace, and that workplace feels shared and engaged and want to change their culture and move forward. And that ties into Elizabeth's question earlier about changing a culture. So yeah, great, brilliant questions, all of these really good.
You see the passion there, the passion. This is a great podcast. I wish I could just take all day, but unfortunately I can't.
Sadly not,
So,
no. We could though, couldn't we? You could go
so
on for hours.
exactly. So the next question is the next question is from Raj. Okay. Now it is said, as we all know, that people leave managers and not companies. And half of UK workers quit their jobs due to a poor relationship with their boss. Now, in this current climate, especially with the great, in quote, resignation, which is a buzzword that we all are hearing now, how can culture be perceived as a company's greatest competitive asset?
Oh, it's another great one, isn't it? So, okay. So I think there's two components to this. Is the perception is around your brand, it's around your values, it's around what you stand for, but there is no point in having any of that unless you're doing it internally. You've got to live and breathe these values. You've got to start with intentions and mean it. So there's no point in saying we're all going to be professional and we're going to be human if the line managers don't know what professional and human looks like to you as an organization. So if you say professional, well, your perception of professional will be entirely different to mine. But also our perception, joint perception of professional, will look really different to someone who might sweep the streets for a living, or someone who might clean toilets for a living, or stack shelves, or is a hairdresser. Professional to all of us is a different construct. So we've got to be really clear about what those values look like, mean, and we're asking. And then we've got to support people to achieve them. There is no point in saying every year we're going to have a new value refresh. Well, Johnny in team marketing has only just done his training from last year's. What? No, we've got to have real deep investment in what we're asking individuals to do, and line managers particularly. Line managers particularly, once they start to have more than one or two people to manage, can struggle. It isn't something that you're trained in, is it? You promote people for their job capability, but not necessarily for their leadership capability. And we often say in our work, we quote the T-bar mechanisms. The T-bar, you may or may not be familiar with this, but the T-bar is as you go up through the leadership, up through the ranks in your role, you sort of go from sort of junior to more senior. You're growing in your kind of particular skill set, but you may not be growing in what the T-bar of leadership skills. So if you're not growing in that kind of, so it goes across your skill set rather than up your skill set. So it's sort of what gives you greater depth in your skill set. If you're not aware of that greater depth, then a business can put out the greatest marketing and the greatest PR about what it wants to look like. But you will only have to look at something like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Twitter to drill into that organisation and get a better picture that actually what they're saying is not what they live and breathe. So culture, and in the Great Resignation piece, you need to live and breathe it. You need, it's no good just saying that we're ethical and then not being ethical. It's no good. And in our sector, there's all kinds of horror stories around sort of dismissing someone after a year and 11 months. That's not ethical. It's not ethical. It's just not fair. It's not right. I mean, obviously, if they're completely underperformed and they've been given every support mechanism to be better, and they've got to a year and 11 months, and you've done everything right, yeah, okay, fair enough. But if you just dismiss them because you suddenly decide you don't like them, how's that nice? How's that right? And what does that say? It doesn't create safety. It doesn't create a mechanism where people feel that all it does is it means people clamber over each other to be the most popular one, and that's what gets put out to the ether. And you can see that, and you do see that, across social media platforms. You see the organisations where people say, yeah, whatever. It's just not what they live and breathe. Whereas the organisations that do, for example, Gymshark, best up, they're doing it as well inside as well as they are externally. So that's how you have to. That's how you kind of beat the competition, I suppose, in the candidate market and the retention market. I want to work in an organisation where I feel happy. I want to work in an organisation where I feel free to make my own decisions. My team feel free to make their own decisions. In fact, one of my team today is watching webinars. And she said she sent me a message yesterday saying I'm going to be watching webinars for most of the morning, just so you know. Not checking in with me whether that's okay, because of course it's okay. It's helping her learning. It's helping her be better at her job. So why would I micromanage that? So yeah, live and breathe it. Live and breathe it. Again, it's more soapboxing. See, don't give me the opportunity to talk. You don't want me to go on, is what I would say. There's a message here.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. And I think this next question you'll love it because based on experience, you would have interacted with a lot of organizations that falls within this question. Anyway, so Susan asks, what makes a workplace culture toxic?
What makes a workplace culture toxic? Wow, that's that there's all kinds of things that make a workplace culture toxic. So I would say poor listening and hearing mechanisms, inability to nip things in the bud, inability often comes down to line manager capability. And when I say line manager capability, I'm not putting line managers on a naughty step and telling them, oh, you're all rubbish. What I mean by that is if you haven't been given the tools to do the job, you won't identify where the issues are beginning to bubble. And if you don't know that, you then get into a situation where those cultures quickly become toxic. They quickly become negative because no one's managing it. And when you've got issues and you've got those sort of toxic behaviours beginning to develop, it becomes conflict, doesn't it? And many people don't want to deal with conflict, and it becomes layered, and it becomes sort of what started off as just a little niggle over somebody putting the milk back in the fridge in the wrong way suddenly becomes like the school playground where everybody's piling in and going, oh well, that person always does that, oh that team always does that, oh that department always does that, oh that whole company always, and suddenly you've got a toxic workplace. And I think I think as individuals, we all have a responsibility to check in on our own actions and say to ourselves, is this the kind of place where I am contributing towards that toxicity? And can I do something different in my behaviours, my intentions, my interactions? Can I be more considerate, more compassionate, more forgiving, more less controlling, perhaps? Or can I raise it? Can I take that higher? Can I take that through different mechanisms? Not necessarily through the grievance always or the disciplinary route, but sometimes just through an open, frank, candid conversation with the people who will hear it. Can you help? Can you make a difference? And if you can't, then do you say, well, actually, do you know what? This isn't an organisation for me. One thing I'd definitely say, don't take it to social media. Don't plaster it all over the world necessarily. That's not the best route. If there's a toxic situation developing in your company, be an adult. Don't pile in and add to the problem. Reflect, recognise that you're only going to contribute towards making it worse if you contribute towards it and make a change. There are all kinds of things I would say that make that culture toxic, and sometimes it's beyond your control. Sometimes it's leadership. Sometimes that leadership mechanism also needs support and help. If leadership are willing to invest in that support and help and understand that they can do something different, then brilliant. If they're not, then if you're not that leader and you're a part of that organization, then perhaps it isn't the organization you should be in. There's the worst book in the world, but the best book in the world, called Who Moved My Cheese, if you don't know it. But that's about taking control of your own career steps. It is literally quite a cringy book to read, but it's really good message in terms of who takes control of your situation, and you do. And in a psychological framework, we also apply the same thing: is you can't change other people's reaction, but you can change your own. So if you're changing your own reaction to something, that reaction as a group think then becomes the change that turns a toxic culture around. But it isn't easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. A bit like Elizabeth's question, an established culture takes time to change. But yeah, great question.
Yeah.
I think
And,
that
as we
ties
all
into the
know,
next. Sorry, carry on.
yeah. Yeah, no, 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 sorry. And I think that the most important thing is organizations don't set out to create a toxic culture. It just happens they may have the best intentions, and then over time they lose the focus, and then these things become ingrained, and it then becomes the norm, and then they're stuck. Rather than act, they just embrace whatever it is. Which brings us to the final question. Now, for those companies who are listening and want to improve their company culture, what steps should they take?
I think we've covered quite a lot of sort of that really in earlier questions, and I think start with understanding. Start with understanding what your organisation is. What I see a lot, and I'm sure you're the same, Edward, is I see leadership make a lot of assumptions about what their organisation is. That doesn't necessarily mean it's reflected in their culture, in their cultural audits, so their surveys and those sorts of mechanisms. So find out what people are saying and thinking and feeling. Don't be afraid to hear either what the feedback is. If you need external support to hear that because it might be negative and you're not comfortable with that, then don't be afraid to ask for that help. the reason I think that's really powerful is that the money might seem off-putting, but the money that you put into it in the sort of that stage is going to prevent you from having more toxic employment tribunal type issues later. And let me tell you, they're a lot more expensive. So I think it's about being bold and brave and listening and hearing. I think the next thing to do is, drilling into that data and that evidence will really give you that picture. And then, if you want to improve your culture, well, why? What's driving you to improve it? Who are you as a business? Don't go, well, because I make, I don't know, beer mats, I want to be like Netflix because they've got great values. You're not Netflix. You make beer mats. Don't be like that. Be like you, but be the best version of you, which I know is a very overused phrase, but it's a good one in this situation. So I think it's being, why do you want to change? And then what is it that you're trying to do? What are you trying to improve? And if your company, if you put out surveys and they tell you that actually there's nothing to improve, we love it, well, then you've saved yourself a fortune going down that route. But if it's that you've recognised that actually you're perhaps quite an old-fashioned company and you want to keep up with the changes in the work world, then start with incremental steps. Don't sort of try and broad brush it because you'll never win. Start with much smaller a plan and grow from there. And be realistic. Improving company culture is about a full investment with everybody, and in that time you will lose people, and sometimes they're some of your best performers. Why? Well, there are some reasons. Some of those reasons is they won't align to the business change, but some of those reasons could be completely personal. Could be that they're moving from the UK to Iceland. It could be that they've suddenly decided that now's the time. All of this change has just propelled them to say, right, well, I want to go now. So accept the fact that you will lose people, but what you lose, you gain too. So, in the positive psychology framework, we always look at what we gain as well as what we, from what we lose, I should say. So we always look at how can we lift something up and make it better. And then if you're looking to make improvements, don't see it as a negative, see it as a positive. And then my final wish, I suppose, is make sure you communicate. What matters to you will not matter to someone else, and what matters to someone else will not matter to you. Make sure you communicate. No matter what you think, it to someone else, it might be the reason that they get out of bed in the morning. It might be the thing that stops them feeling anxious. It might be the difference between this month's mortgage and next month's mortgage. It might be all manner of things that you don't know about. So, even in the best made surveys in all the world, lots of people don't tell you their inside leg measurement, do they? So don't make assumptions, communicate. And I think that's probably the final word on that. There is loads in the improving company culture piece. Yeah. Good questions. Really good
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this podcast. However, like they say, every good thing has to come to an end. So that's all we have time for today. And thank you for joining us, Sarah. Now, where can our listeners find you if they want to get in touch?
Well, they can find me and us on LinkedIn. So I'm Sarah Brewster, obviously, and also Freshly's got a company page on LinkedIn, so you can find us there, or you can find us on our website, which is freshly.co.uk. And you can find out loads of information. We're also on, for those that are sector specific, we're on the dots, and we're kind of across lots of things within the creative sector, so you can find us there if you want to sort of speak to Creative UK or Yuki or any of those other sort of member bodies. You can find us in those sort of bodies, but yeah, mostly we're look at our website or LinkedIn, I think, is the best place. Yeah. We're also thinking of doing a TikTok account, but that's not going to come yet.
Oh, that'd be good though.
Yeah, I know.
Everyone's using TikTok now, though.
Yeah, yeah. It's the place. It's the place to be if you're cool in HR. It's just I'm not natural in front of a video, but
Yeah,
I'm learning.
it's all about embracing the culture, the technological culture.
That's right. My kids love TikTok. They're all over it. They're like, "Mum, you'd be great. You'd be brilliant at it." Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll give it a try. Yeah, but yeah.
Well,
But
as soon as you launch it, let me know.
I
And
will
I'll be
do.
one of your first subscribers that will
Oh,
follow
good.
you on it.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. Thank you for today. It's been great talking to
Yeah,
you. Yeah, thank you. I really
no
enjoyed it.
problem at all. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And you can find us on most social media. Use the hashtag AskHR Plus to get in touch with us. We'll be sharing about upcoming episodes using it. And you could have your workplace question answered in a future broadcast. And also, special thank goes to Pete, Beth, Mark, Elizabeth, James, Lily, Matthew, and Raj for sending their questions this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe to keep up with other videos on our channel. And we'll see you next time for another workplace conversation. Thank you so much.